Welcome to the roller coaster ride that is the United States' economy. And I am sure that the rest of the world would find all of this so much more fun if the entire global economy were not inexorably linked back to Washington, and if the White House were not on the verge of having it all fall apart. Well, at least you can try to put it back together again, right? And then again, maybe not. But we can trace the current problems all back to Trump's announcement of massive new tariffs against almost every country. Oh, and against penguins too. And while that part has been fantastic for the memes, they taxed our fish, then asked for more, we answer tariffs with total war. The situation is actually substantially worse than it may appear. Sure, you can look at the markets, notice that the stonks actually stink, and conclude that the United States is digging its own economic grave. However, if you look closer at how the world financial and military systems are set up, it is somehow a whole lot worse. So, today, we will cover 10 reasons why things are so awful. Or, alternatively, how the totally terrible tariffs torpedoed the tenuous truce between trans-Pacific titans. I will start with the 4 that are straightforward and you have likely heard about: retaliatory tariffs, other forms of non-tariff retaliations, integrated global supply chains, and reduced military capacity. And do not worry, we will cover those quickly and focus on some of their non-obvious implications. Then we will look at the 6 more complicated facets of the problem: the risk of recession due to uncertainty, the risk of recession because consumers will hold back spending, the absence of domestic investment to take advantage of the protections, and those last 2 are fun because 2028 is the root of the problem, the rapid loss of trade deficits causing the US national debt to surge, a crisis in confidence also causing the debt to surge, and finally a meta problem the next time that Trump makes a similar move. First, though, I want to briefly discuss the Trump administration's logic behind the tariffs. And I know that looking for logic here will strike some of you as a tough ask. I cannot blame you when the big board has numbers based on trade deficits of goods, but then describes them as retaliatory tariffs. Never mind that it listed Taiwan and the European Union as countries. More on that later. However, there are 2 strategic components to the broad-based tariffs. First is a pure domestic politics story. Liberal trade policy benefits U.S. consumers and hurts some U.S. manufacturers. Now, the economic gains for the consumers are much larger than the losses for the manufacturers. However, if your support base is people employed in the manufacturing sector, which many Trump supporters are, you may very well not care. The second half of this is that the earlier gutting of U.S. manufacturing is a national security risk. This is an assessment that many previous administrations shared, and it is something that we have discussed at length before. The short version of this problem is that, in the event of a major power war, you need factories to switch over to weapons production. No factories, no weapons, no victory. The additional wrinkle here is the rhetoric behind the China-specific tariffs, which have proven far stickier than the others that Trump seems willing to negotiate on. The basic problem is that trade increases wealth. But if there is a deficit between the 2 countries in favor of China, that cash could be converted into weapons. And as we all know, the balance of power determines coercive military capacity. Consequently, if the trade is really working against you, you might want to cut the trade to mitigate the problem. I should note, though, that there is always a better solution here. If the benefits of trade look like this, then find a way to redistribute those benefits so that the balance of power offsets, but everyone still enjoys the greater welfare. So while Trump has been more stubborn with Chinese trade policy, do not be surprised if later we learn that he is trying to force China into a more favorable position for the reasons that we just visualized. Cue the cliché because it is in full effect, though I should add that the imposition of tariffs even over the short run has a real effect on each country's economy, so these moves have more credibility than a simple cheap talk bluff. And you can see the game playing out in real time. Trump threatens new 50% tariff on China if Beijing does not remove retaliatory duties. China to raise tariffs on U.S. goods from 34% to 84% in response to Trump tariffs. Trump tariffs on China now total 145%. China raises tariffs on U.S. to 125%. But look a little closer, and the narratives within the stories differ. Left-leaning outlets are focused on the escalation of a trade war that will damage the U.S. economy, citing Fed Chair Jerome Powell and Goldman Sachs. Well, that's something you don't see every day. The left saying, trust the second largest investment bank in the world! Meanwhile, right-leaning outlets are focused on the political rivalry between the United States and China. How do I know these differences exist? I think you already have an idea about the answer. It is thanks to our returning sponsor, Ground News. Given the deluge of news stories related to the tariffs, there is no better time to sign up than right now. And by going to ground.news/linesonmaps or scanning the QR code on your screen, you can get 40% off of their Vantage plan, which gives you all of these insights and so much more. So thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring this channel. Okay, now to all of the problems, beginning with retaliatory tariffs. The non-subtle version of this that is making the news at the moment is that foreign leaders are upset at the tariffs and are striking back tit for tat. No need to go into further details about that. The more subtle version is the breakdown of conditional cooperation. Remember, part of Trump's motivation is to protect special interest manufacturing jobs at the expense of the broader American public. Well, every other leader around the world also has some special interests that they would like to protect. Fortunately, though, under normal circumstances, they do not implement those policies. Well, maybe some of the specialist of interests, but not all. That is because tariffs are like a good old-fashioned standoff in the Wild West. Everyone has their trade weapons raised, with the other states in their crosshairs. However, no one pulls the trigger because that would cause everyone else to pull the trigger as well. And the world where no one fires is better for everyone than the world where everyone fires. Unfortunately, though, Trump fired. So here we are. This is literally Tariffs 101, and it is something that my self-respecting academic alter ego teaches every year. Sticking with retaliation, number 2 is retaliation outside of the tariff framework. Let's talk about bonds for a second. Sadly, no, this section is not about secret agents. It is about funding a government. And, funny enough, these bonds are more powerful than this guy could ever hope to be. The US federal government is about $36.7 trillion in debt, and is projected to have a $1.9 trillion deficit in 2025. You see, when governments need money that they do not have, they do not go to a bank and ask for a loan like you or I would. Rather, they announce the sale of treasuries, essentially a promise to pay their bearers an amount at a later date. Such treasuries range from a 3-month treasury bill to a 30-year treasury bond. Those loaning the money are not doing it out of generosity, though. They earn an interest rate set by what the market dictates. So if a ton of people want to buy treasuries, the interest rates will be low, and the US government gets a great deal on its loans. But if no one shows up, then the United States must raise the interest rate to entice more people to purchase the treasuries. Bonds are liquid assets, though. If I buy a treasury note today that will not mature for 10 years, I am not stuck with it. I can turn around and sell it to someone else if I want to. That is all prologue to a deep concern involving China. At the end of 2024, Beijing owned about $769 billion in US securities, second only to Japan's $1.01 trillion. If China wanted to, it could liquidate those assets. To be clear, this has not happened yet as far as we can tell, but let's think through the consequences. As a starting point, China would have to take a loss to do this, hence why Beijing has not yet pulled the trigger. However, the fire sale would bring in a deluge of investors looking to purchase treasuries at a great price. A problem then arises for the US government the next time that it tries to sell a fresh batch of treasuries, which, if you look at the schedule, is basically every few days. A ton of money just left the market to purchase the formerly Chinese-held certificates. To get the new treasuries to clear, you need to convince more investors to enter the market. That means raising interest rates offered. In turn, the United States will have to pay a greater premium to run budget deficits and service the national debt. We will discuss more about the precise financial implications for the United States later. Hint, it will be a lot of money. Number 3 is the breakdown of global supply chains. If the point of tariffs is to protect American manufacturing jobs, there is one slight problem. American manufacturing jobs rely on imported input goods. You might remember this slide from my video on the Western Territorial Peace. Well, it nicely summarizes how you cannot assemble an American-made Boeing airplane without tons of international support. The counterpoint is that the tariffs will force all of those inputs to be manufactured at home, so mission accomplished. Well, we will interrogate the viability of reshoring manufacturing later. For now, though, even if you assume that it can happen, factories will not sprout up overnight. In the meantime, if you lose just a single component piece of this operation, then you do not have a plane at all. No plane, no American manufacturing jobs constructing that engine nacelle, nor the fuselage, nor the tail fin, nor nothing. Thus, the short-run effect is the loss of some of the jobs that Trump intends to save. You may remember that this was the central problem with U.S. automotive manufacturing during the pandemic, leading to both layoffs and fewer cars on the market. We are also seeing this effect right now on the other side of the world. At the start of the invasion of Ukraine, Western countries imposed broad sanctions on Russia. Such sanctions are effectively infinite tariffs. After all, both an outright ban and a $1 trillion import fee have the same ultimate effect. Well, without those foreign input goods, the Russian manufacturing sector sputtered. That is part of how the country ended up in an inflationary spiral that it still faces. Back to the United States. The word that you will be hearing a ton in regard to the situation is stagflation, which hammers economic stagnation and inflation into a single word. The economy stagnates because companies cannot produce goods as easily as they could before. That raises prices, which causes inflation, and thus gives us both parts of the word. You may recall stagflation's heyday occurred during the 1973 oil crisis, when shocks to oil prices caused a similar suppression of business production. Stagflation presents a sharp dilemma for those crafting monetary policy. The standard solution to inflation is to raise interest rates, as seen most recently during the pandemic. If only it were that easy. The standard solution to stagnating production is to lower interest rates, which encourages greater investment. Thus, under stagflation, trying to solve one problem exacerbates the other. I do not envy Jerome Powell right now. Number 4, reduced military spending. Recall how part of Trump's goal with the tariffs is to onshore manufacturing and enhance U.S. military strength. Well, part of what determines American deterrent and coercive power is tax revenue. No tax dollars, no defense spending, no ability to deter one's adversaries. If China is the main threat, then tariffs targeting Beijing create problems across the Pacific. Thus, Washington may be okay absorbing those economic losses. But Trump's original tariffs also hit everyone for 10%, with plenty of countries taking extra damage. And even after the poster's plan got put on pause, the 10% minimum on countries not named China stayed. If that causes a recession due to the manufacturing problem from before, or a bunch of other reasons that we will discuss in a moment, then suddenly the Pentagon's budget is under threat. And that ignores the double whammy of provoking U.S. allies with the tariffs, the same countries that are supposed to come to America's defense in times of need. Nor does it take into account the forthcoming problems with deficit spending, which we will also address in a minute. Now to the more complicated points. Number 5 is a recession due to uncertainty. Here is a cliche for you that is nonetheless true. Businesses need predictable climates so that they can invest in what will pay off down the road. However, right now, the Trump administration is creating the exact opposite climate. And it is not just the existence of tariff policies, it is also the haphazard implementation of them. The need for articles like a timeline of Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs is not reassuring. Nor is it a good sign when Trump announces 125% tariffs against China, but it is actually a 145% tariff. Until the roller coaster ride comes to an end, very few U.S. businesses are going to be making substantial investments. Moreover, this holdup problem extends globally, which further impacts American companies that are tied to imports. You can see something like this with the Nintendo Switch 2. Pre-orders for the United States were supposed to begin on April 9th, but were suspended indefinitely. Nintendo's problem? It is hard to price something when you do not know what the taxes will be. It is also hard to schedule shipments. After the first Trump administration, Nintendo wisely moved some of its console production out of China and to Vietnam and Cambodia. Thus, now Nintendo can strategically choose the country that the United States receives its consoles from, so as to minimize the tariffs. But that first requires understanding what tariff the Trump administration will apply to each country, thereby leaving us in a holding pattern. Or maybe you just delay a bit, thinking that the Trump administration will eventually include an exemption for your industry, because that is happening, or at least it will be happening temporarily. You can see why confusion reigns in boardrooms right now. In the meantime, though, commerce shuts down. Let's review. No investments, no sales. No investments, no economic growth. No sales, no economic growth, recession. Number 6, a recession due to consumers holding back purchases. Let's pivot to the temporal dynamics of tariffs. Yes, it is Trump implementing them now, but there is no guarantee that they will hold 4 years later, under a variety of other possible administrations. No, one over. There you go. Yeah, you may have heard about him in the news recently, and not for reasons that are happy. Anyway, suppose for a moment that it is January 2028, and you know that the tariffs will disappear in a year. Perhaps the Trump administration has become incredibly unpopular, and November's election is on track to be a blue tsunami. Indeed, perhaps it is her year. Oh, and by the way, if you guessed that the title of the album that this photo came from was President Trump Signs Executive Orders on Ending the Biden-Era War on Showers, then you are a liar because there was no predicting that. Where was I? Yes, the year is 2028, and everyone thinks that Trump is going to lose. Well, unless you really need a product right now, you are going to hold off on making the purchase. It will be a lot cheaper if you just wait until 2029. That is true for U.S. consumers thinking about an American product that uses foreign input goods. It is also true for U.S. consumers thinking about a purely foreign product. And it is also true for foreign consumers thinking about a U.S. product subject to a retaliatory tariff. Now, lower prices sound great on the surface, but what you actually get is a deflationary spiral. Businesses know that they will not make sales, so they do not make short-run investments either. The economy enters a recession, with the only silver lining being that January 2029 is the light at the end of the tunnel. In practice, the situation is more complicated. It is 2025 right now, so the picture of 2029 is far more hazy than the extreme example that I just gave. It is also possible that some of the tariffs will stick from administration to administration. That is exactly what happened when Biden kept the Trump-era tariffs on China. On the flip side, Trump himself is liable to cancel all of the tariffs tomorrow. Either way, this uncertainty at a minimum will matter on the margins and inhibit economic growth. For number 7, we apply the same logic to the producer side. Recall how one of Trump's goals for the tariffs is to reshore manufacturing. Well, what dictates an entrepreneur's decision to invest in new factories is the expectation that the long-term profits coming from those factories will justify the massive upfront expense to build them. The trouble here is that profits depend on continued protection from foreign competitors, because the moment that the goods come flooding back from China or Vietnam, the US company is uncompetitive and starts operating at a loss. Now, compared to the consumer's delayed decision, stalling investment in anticipation of a better business environment is a much, much bigger problem. That is because consumption is not an investment. When consumers buy most products, they immediately get the enjoyment out of the purchase. In contrast, entrepreneurs are making investment decisions today about things that may not provide any returns until 2030. It is conceivable that such investments never experience the business environment that is supposed to benefit them. As a result, the upshot of the tariffs is limited to businesses that can quickly and cheaply expand, or the ones that will still be somewhat profitable when staring down international competition. Number 8. Trade deficits and financing debt. Let's go back to those treasuries from earlier. China and Japan are not the only countries that own U.S. debt. Foreign investors overall hold about a quarter of it. Domestic private actors hold 55%, a good chunk of it by all-American Steves on the streets, who may be entirely unaware that it is a part of their retirement accounts. And intergovernmental holdings bizarrely comprise the remainder of U.S. debt. But what drives the foreign portion? When the United States runs trade deficits, dollars effectively flow out of the country. However, the holders of those dollars are not stuffing them under their mattresses. They need something to do with the cash. Some of it goes back into the U.S. stock market, giving companies more capital to expand their business. But a disproportionate number of those dollars filter back into U.S. treasuries. Why? For one thing, they are already denominated in dollars. For another, they are, traditionally, the world's safest investment. They have the full faith and backing of the United States government. More on that in the next section. As we discussed earlier, though, the increased demand for treasuries reduces the interest rates offered. Consequently, it is cheap for the government to borrow money. Make no mistake about it, the originally proposed tariffs will lower trade deficits, if for no other reason than by quashing trade flows. The lower trade deficits will no doubt please Trump, but let's follow the chain of logic and think about the second-order consequences. Lower trade deficits mean less demand for treasuries, and thus higher interest rates, which, despite the traditionally green arrows for things going up, is decidedly bad for the United States. When markets closed on April 2nd, the yield of a 30-year treasury sat at 4.48%. Late that afternoon was the Liberation Day announcement. Well, let's look at how the markets reacted. Now, the immediate aftermath saw a drop in yields. What is up with that? The strange twist is consistent with the perverse idea that the United States is normally a safe place to park money when the rest of the world's economy is in trouble, even if the United States is responsible for the turmoil. But within a few days of the announcement, Treasury yields began ticking up, eventually hitting 4.88%. Was that a function of the trade deficit argument from a moment ago? I do not know. Part of the fun of looking at markets, if you can call it fun, is that no one is really sure why anything that happens there is happening. But it is one explanation. To make the consequences of this change more concrete, a 1 percentage point increase in interest rates corresponds to about a $70 to $80 billion increase in interest payments for the year. And the only reason that it is not immediately more is because the vast majority of the existing $36.7 trillion debt already has interest rates locked in. You will remember that there is a liquid market to buy and sell treasuries, but all the investors are doing there is jockeying over a trade price. From the government's perspective, it is already a fixed contract at the face value, no matter who holds the treasury. Thus, the $70 to $80 billion is the price of the new debt issued. However, this still comes with a heavy dose of bad news. That $70 to $80 billion will have compounding interest year over year, so it will go up. Also, some portion of the $36.7 trillion national debt will require the Treasury to issue a new round of securities, which will also be at the higher rate. All told, this is the leading narrative for why Trump reversed course on the bulk of the tariffs on April 9th. But look again at the yield chart. This is April 9th. After the tariff pause, the yield crept up some more before leveling off. It did not go down, which should be the case if Trump solved the problem. As we discussed in my aforementioned recent feature-length video, Trump's plan is to play a game of chicken, essentially betting that the United States will experience less pain than the rest of the world. Thus, eventually, the White House can force the other countries to buckle on policy issues not directly related to the import taxes. But the Treasury sell-off suggested that the Trump administration had overestimated its strength relative to the other countries, and that the dollar is not infallible. Part of what might be going on here is that as long as China is still a part of the tariff schedule, there will be some further concerns regarding bond yields. And part of it may be number 9, a crisis in confidence. A moment ago, I kind of speed ran past an important point regarding the United States' economic power. So let's backtrack because it is a major concern. When world markets hit turbulence, investors flock to U.S. Treasuries for safe haven. Ironically, this is often true even when the United States is the source of the problem. The Great Recession is a great example of this principle in action. Other countries were at risk of economic contagion, but did not have the luxury of controlling the world's largest reserve currency. Consequently, U.S. Treasuries were still safe investments, even as the Great Recession spread everywhere else around the world and lingered for years afterward. Again, consistent with that, yield rates dropped in the immediate aftermath of the Rose Garden announcement. However, as we just finished explaining, they soon shot right past their pre-Liberation Day numbers. Another explanation for what is happening there is that the tariffs are also creating a second crisis, one that is related, but is still its own distinct problem. One determinant of U.S. Treasury prices is expectations that the United States will pay back the principal on the loan. Traditionally, there is virtually no doubt there. I mean, how could you not trust the freedom that this eagle is bringing? As a result, the United States could borrow purely at the time value of money. Washington did not have to pay any sort of risk premium. How times change. Some in the market found the announcement so unhinged that they no longer had a clear understanding of what Trump will and will not do. Of course, that is classic art of the deal strategy, even if we have previously explored how the math of a madman strategy usually does not work out. And the deeper problem with this is that there is no putting the genie back in the bottle, not even if the genie is Kazam. The Trump administration cannot do a dance, flip a switch, and suddenly have the markets trusted again. Meanwhile, I know I keep rehashing the part about listing Taiwan as a country, but it is a perfect microcosm for a connected problem that the administration has. Previous administrations would have been more likely to recognize how Taiwan being a country breaks U.S. policy on cross-strait relations. And maybe everyone in Trump's orbit also understands that at a basic level. But the staff within the current administration do not have the political experience that is normally present in the White House to see the word Taiwan and then double-check everything. And thus you have a broader concern both in the markets and in other capitals about a lack of care in crafting policy that could lead to bigger problems. So, if either the madman strategy or pure accident could lead to a default on loans, then suddenly there needs to be a risk premium associated with U.S. Treasuries. Hence, another possible reason why their yields have shot up. Finally, number 10, the meta problem of Trump's reversal. Let's recap the narrative of that reversal for a second. On Liberation Day, Trump announces massive tariffs against the rest of the world. The stock market plunges in response, believing that Trump is implementing crazy policies. Eventually, the bond market also falls apart, also believing that Trump is implementing crazy policies. Republicans close to Trump plead with him that this is a disaster, and the markets prove that the consensus on the matter is overwhelming. Therefore, Trump caves in, he backtracks on a lot of the policy, and markets recover a large portion of their lost wealth, though not all of it. The lesson here for the markets is perverse. They did not expect Trump to reverse course. Otherwise, that expectation would have already been built into the prices, and they would not have moved in response to the news. Friendly reminder that someone who tells you that they know what the markets will do next is either lying to themselves or to you, or they are trading on insider information, which raises an entirely different set of concerns. The next time something like this happens, though, investors will have already priced in some portion of that expectation. And that creates a meta problem, which I assure you has nothing to do with this guy. Put differently, imagine that we have another Rose Garden ceremony and another equally shocking announcement from Trump. This time, the markets might not dip as much. After all, they have learned that he might flip-flop the next day, and you would not want to sell off your stocks if they will rebound tomorrow. Yet, if the markets do not plummet in response to the announcement, then Republicans cannot use that as verifiable feedback to convince Trump to reverse course. So, the policy stays in place, and the long-run effect is that Americans get soaked. The meta problem that arises here is that if you believe this to be the case, then you should sell off when you have the chance. But then everything tumbles, and Trump learns that he should rescind the policy. But then for you, it would be best not to sell in the first place. Begin infinite regress. The way markets reach an equilibrium here is that there is some sell-off, which increases the probability of a Trump reversal. However, it does not get to the level of a guarantee, and the price reflects the relative chance of a reversal, given the current price. Yeah, I know, that last sentence sounded like a mess, but such is the self-referencing nature of equilibrium fixed points. Either way, there is a key lesson to be drawn here. We should not necessarily treat the saga of the tariff rollercoaster as firm evidence that the White House will eventually reach a policy consistent with economists' expectations of American welfare maximization. This ride is only beginning. Thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. Head over to ground.news/linesonmaps or scan the QR code on your screen to get a great 40% off deal on their Vantage plan. Meanwhile, if you want to learn more about the economic system that the West lives by, or used to live by, check out this feature-length video on the subject. And if you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.